Very good. Is this working? All right. I appreciate the prayers that you all give on my behalf and everyone who preaches, because I realize that me speaking has no power of it amongst itself. It's your prayers that make this sermon useful, and so I thank you for that. If you were to do a top 10 list, which we would only have a top 2 list in my house, of readers, I would be third on that, or second on the list. Now, if Lucy the dog could read, I would be third. Okay, so I'm way down there. So here I might be talking about a little bit something I don't really know that well. But you know, when you're reading a novel and you start the first couple chapters, and if the author's good, they very skillfully introduce characters. They set scenes. You know, they explain backgrounds for the characters. You know, you're in the 4th chapter, and maybe a new character shows up, and you make it to the 10th chapter, and that guy that he was talking about at the beginning of the book showed up. And it's just masterful how they do that. Well, if you were going to read the Bible like that, and you get to the 18th chapter, which happens to be the book of Job, it is totally different. It doesn't, there are no characters that go from this book to that book. There are no references, of verses from this book to Job or the other way around. I found 2 places where Job is mentioned in the Bible, James and Ezekiel. Ezekiel did it twice in the same chapter, so I counted that once. But it was just to the person of Job. It wasn't a quote. So like you read through Matthew, and there are all these quotes from the Old Testament, and it's reinforcing how the Bible is a complete whole thing. And so you come across the book of Job, and it's different. And for some reason, I decided to pick the verses from the last chapter of Job. And when I started looking at that, I figured out that the context of this is not anything except for the book of Job. I mean, I found some very unhelpful people that helped me, said, well, the book of Job was written somewhere between the 14th century BC and the 3rd century BC. And it's like, thank you for telling me it was written in the past. And where did Job live? They didn't really know. Somewhere over in that Bible area, Now we know just from reading the writing and comparing it to how the Hebrews wrote that it was probably a Hebrew, the poetic license and all that. And as I started looking at those chapters at the end of the book, I ended up coming to the conclusion that I needed to expand the focus beyond those few verses. So the good news today, besides the real good news, is I'm not covering the whole Bible. Okay? The bad news is I'm covering the whole chapter of Job. Okay? So let's hang on and we'll do this. I ended up seeing the book of Job in 4 different acts, if you want to act like it's a play. The first 2 chapters, it's setting the scene. And so we'll spend some time looking at the scene and how we got started. And then there's a big chunk, Job 3 through 31, where there's conversations between Job and his friends. And so we'll go over that. And then in 32 through 41, I'd labeled this the silent ones speak. And one of them is someone who had been there the whole time through all those conversations, but it was his first time to speak. And then the other one is God, who had not been speaking up to that point. And then the last chapter of the book is just wrapping it up. So we'll go through that. I don't know if it's your habit to have the Bible open as you're going through. I'll hopefully keep you along with where I am. But I think it would be useful for you to be looking through these chapters as I'm looking at them. Some of them you're going to be skipping around a little bit, and that's fine. you may find something even better than what I'm saying by looking through there. So in Job chapter 1, it starts out, there was a man in the land of Uz named Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. And so this is stated as a fact, that if you're going to walk around this place, wherever it was, and you came across this person, you would come away saying, that is a man of God. And he's different than those around him because he's a man of God. It's just stated as a fact. So he had kids. He had all these livestock. He was a rich man. And in verse 5, it's interesting that his kids would have parties, and he would be concerned about his kids' spiritual welfare. And so he would actually give a sacrifice on behalf of his kids just in case they may have happened to sin while they were partying. Okay, this is the kind of man he was. So in this act, we have a couple scenes. One's on earth and one's in heaven. And so we actually go to heaven, and everyone's presenting themselves before God, and Satan is there also. And God says, where did you come from? And he says, I've been out wandering around looking at things. And the Lord said, verse 8, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. So this is not Satan saying, I want to pick on Job. This is God bringing Job up in the topic. And if you want to skip ahead while I'm talking, that you see back in chapter 2, verse 3, same exact words. God doesn't change his story about Job as they go through here. And Satan basically says, well, Job has a cush life. Why? What's the big deal? Of course he fears you and worships you because his life is easy. So God said, you can do whatever you want to Job, to Satan, but you can't touch his body. And so in one day, in one moment, 4 things happen where he loses all of his possessions. He loses his kids. It's basically him and his wife, and that's all that's left. It all happens at once. And if you skip down, the 4 different verses in there, and they all end with the person who's telling Job this thing says, I alone have escaped to tell you this. So it just gives you an idea that how complete and utter the destruction was that the news was bringing. In this verse, the verse is from 20 to 22. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head, and he fell down to the ground and worshipped. He said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. Multiple times, I read that in the last week. I'm going, don't know if I'd be doing that. I don't think I would have been Job there. Maybe someone else later in verse 2 or chapter 2. So we go to chapter 2, and the same scene in heaven, the same thing. The sons of everyone is appearing before God, and Satan comes up. He asks where Satan has been. It's the same answer. Verse 3, the Lord said to Satan, it's the same exact words. Have you considered my servant Job? Okay, this is after Job has lost everything. For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds fast his integrity, although you, Satan, incited me, the Lord, against him to ruin for no cause. So the same things. And this story is very interesting because it's just telling you things straight up. So all these things happen to Job. God's all powerful. So he could have said these aren't going to happen. But he let Satan do these things. And these all happened for no cause. Pretty important as you're reading through the rest of Job to know that. And then Satan goes, come on, take away all his stuff. He says, basically, let me afflict this guy's body, and then he'll curse you. And so, sure enough, the Lord says, you can do anything you want to him, but you can't kill him, save his life. And so he went out, and Job got sore boils on the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. I don't think I've had that kind of pain. Then the Wife of the Year award goes to Job's wife. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as a foolish woman speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? In all of this, Job did not sin with his lips. I thought about Proverbs 31, where an excellent wife, who can we find? It's a kind of an opposite verse that doesn't really fit, but I had to throw it in there. And so all this happens to Job, and then he has some friends. They hear about him. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And they made an appointment, and they came together to sympathize with Job and comfort him. And when they saw Job, they couldn't believe what they saw. And verse 13, this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's here, so I'm going to talk about. When they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw his pain was very great. So we will have opportunities in life to be with someone who has had a loss. And I don't know if it's an American thing or if it's a human thing, but we feel like we need to say something. And most of the time, what we need to do is be there. And we need to just let the person lead to what happens. My dad was, he was dying. He was in the hospital. And my life was such, I think I was going to seminary at that time. My life was such that I could actually just go to spend hours at the hospital with him. Just sat there. Most of the time I was working on, school work or whatever that. And if he wanted to talk, we talked. And if he didn't, we didn't. But I made sure he knew that I was there, but he didn't have to do anything. So what can we learn from setting the scene here? So it's clear. It says Job is blameless and upright, and he's turning away from evil. Okay, so that's clearly stated. I've already mentioned that God said he was incited against Job without cause. So all this stuff happened to Job, and there was no reason for it. There was no reason stated for it. In all this, Job did not sin. Okay, so that's the first 2 chapters. And so we go on to Job and his friends. And so this is 3 through 31. And it's something you should read. You should probably read it multiple times. It's basically Job talks for a while. Usually Job talks for 1 or 2 chapters, and then one of his friends talks. And it goes back and forth like that. And as Nelson reminded you, I'm an engineer, so of course I counted this. Job talked 9 different times. Eliphaz talked 3, Bildad 3, and Zophar 2. So Job started at the beginning, and then it was every other one. And Eliphaz took a turn, and then Job would talk, and that's the way the cycle went. Okay. And so the way I organized this is I just pulled together some of the things that Job said, and then I pulled together the things that the friends said. Of course, the first one is like, Job's angry. He's upset. He starts out saying, why was I born? Why did God bring me to life? In chapter 10, he says, I loathe my life. I will give full vent to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. So he's speaking what he's feeling. He said, I have not sinned, and why am I a target of God? So here Job is saying that he understands, he's self-aware, that he does his best to follow God. And I think if you'd ask him, are you a sinner? He'd say, yes, I'm a sinner. Everyone's a sinner. But compared to everyone else, and I know we don't really care about compared, but he's a man of God. In Job 7, he says, have I sinned, and what have I done to you? Speaking to God, O watcher of men. Why have you set me as your target so that I'm a burden to myself? But Job fully understood that God, this was from God. It may not have been exactly straight from God, but God could have stopped it, so it was from God. So he understood where this came from. As you're reading through these sections, you're starting to get a picture of what he's thinking. And it's not different than what we think. That's why it's worthwhile for you to read this. So, one of the things that's different about Job than his friends, he doesn't just spend time complaining or about his life, but he also has a focus towards God. And that came out multiple times. So in chapter 9 and chapter 12, he talks about the power of God. In chapter 10, he talks about God being the creator. And since God's the creator, that obviously sets him apart from us, right? We are not the creator. He does get a little snarky, word that my wife likes to use. In verse 12, he's talking to his friends, and surely you are the people, and with you wisdom will die. Okay, so he kind of gets a little snarky with them. And it's interesting that he says he presents his case in 13. I prepared my case, and I know I'll be vindicated. Going on, this is a verse you probably heard, 19:25. As for me, I know my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will take his stand on the earth. So this tells me that Job understands he may be the most righteous man in town, but he also needs a Redeemer. He knows that's something he knows. And he kind of wraps it up in 29 through 31. He talks about how great his past was. He talks about how he's humiliated and how he's basically a laughingstock. But he wraps it up in 31 saying his integrity is sound and he is there. So interspersed amongst those, here's all the things that his friends are saying. And it boils down to one basic thing. Is the friends understand, wrongly, but they understand if bad things happen to you, you must be a bad person. And the other way around, if good things happen to you, it's because you're a good person. They have this concrete understanding of how things work and how they're seeing life. And it'd been interesting to sit and talk with them and know who they know, that they know is a good person, and bad things have happened to them. You know, I wonder what they'd say about that. So Eliphaz in Job 4, remember now, whoever has perished being innocent, or where were the upright destroyed? Bildad, chapter 8, lo, God will not reject a man of integrity, nor will he support evildoers. So this is their understanding. Zophar gets a little tired of Job saying that he's upright. He says, do you know the secrets of wisdom, and can you discover the depths of God? So he's poking at Job a little bit. Okay. And then Job 15, Eliphaz, do you hear the secret counsel of God and limit wisdom to yourself? What do you know that we do not know? And what do you understand that we do not? Okay. There's other place where I didn't write this down where Job just really gets kind of tired of these friends. You know, he says that. So what's happening here? So Job was convinced that he'd done nothing wrong to deserve his losses. And from the first few chapters, he's right. Okay, so we get to see behind the curtain what's going on. Again, Job's friends, their understanding was bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people, and there's no mixing of those two. And they're wrong about that. Job's friends are not focused on God, so they didn't really talk about God and any of his character, but Job did. And I think that's part of where they were missing. Okay. So chapter 32 is the next act in the scene. And it's 32 through 41, so the second to last one. So there's two characters here. Elihu, yeah, something like that. He's a young guy. He'd been sitting there the whole time. He came with these three men, and he just sat there and listened to this back and forth all the time. And as you're reading through what Elihu is saying, I mean, he has a much higher focus on God. He sees the error in both of these judgments. He's pretty close to speaking for God here, as opposed to just dreaming up whatever he's thinking. So in 33, he says, "Behold, let me tell you, you are not right in this, for God is greater than man," speaking to Job. So he clearly states that we're down here and God is way up there. It's a big gap between us. Again in 33, a little later, "If you have not anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me and keep silent, and I will teach you wisdom." And then that's Elihu speaking on behalf of God. Okay, so he's basically saying, if you can talk to me, that's great. Otherwise, you need to just shut your trap and listen to what God has to say. Okay. Job 34, he confirms that God sees all men, that he sees everything that we do. There's nothing secret from God. He knows all things. Job 35, "If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him?" I love this part. "If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against God? And if your transgressions are many, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what are you to give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand?" So here he's teaching us that God is fully sufficient all by himself. He doesn't need anything. Nothing can be added to God. He's complete and perfect and right. Job 36, he says that whole chapter is about how God is mighty. In 37, God rules all creation. And so then we move to 38, and this is when God himself speaks out of a whirlwind. He starts by asking Job, "Who is this that contends?" 38, verse 2. "Who is this contends with God? And who is that darkens my counsel by words without knowledge?" So God's calling him out and saying, you're talking about things you don't know about. And then 38 and 39 are just God talking about what his command of nature, his idea that everything in nature happens according to God's command. In 39, as you read down through there, questions about nature. So verse 1, "Do you know the time the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the deer?" 19, "Do you give the horse its might? Do you clothe its neck with the mane?" 26, verse 26, "Is your understanding by the way the hawk soars and stretch out its wing?" But God's saying all of this thing you see in creation is because of God's power and his direction and his design. Okay? Job chapter 40. Here's a conversation between God and Job. Then the Lord, verse 1, "Then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer for it." Then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. Once I have spoken, and I will not answer. Even twice, I will add nothing more." Not surprisingly, face to face with God, this is Job's reaction. And it would be the reaction of everybody in this place. Overwhelming, just an overwhelming position of which you just can't do anything. Going on in chapter 40, verse 8, I highlighted here. Will you really annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? God's speaking to Job. And then it finishes out, and he's talking about mighty creatures, the behemoth and the Leviathan, and he made the creatures that are probably the scariest ones he can come up with. And he says, I made those. Okay. What are you going to do about it? Right? Kind of thing. So a couple comments here on this third section is Elihu has a God focus in his thinking, and I think that's something we can take away, and it'd be a good thing for us to just practice that. The young guy has a better understanding of things of God than his older friends. Just kind of a little side comment there. It's like we should be looking for godly people to be with, and we should not be looking at how old they are or anything like that. We should be finding the godly person to be with. I was just talking about this earlier today. And another thing, God doesn't answer Job's questions. Job has all these questions, and God talks about his power, his might. He doesn't come through and say, okay, this is what was happening, and this is how I did, and this is why. None of that stuff. Okay? So here we have Job asking these questions and not getting an answer. So what are we supposed to do with that? And I think the reason that question is, I think, important because every one of us can understand that. Asking questions, not getting an answer. So wrapping up the story in 42, I finally get to the verses I picked. And Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I have declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful to me that I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak, and I will ask you, and you, God, will instruct me. I have heard of you by hearing of the ear, and now my eye sees you. Therefore, I retract and repent in dust and ashes. So even the most spiritual guy in town repents when he sees God. When you're reading through the rest of the chapter, it kind of gets tidied up. I think it's interesting. The first thing that happens is he talks to Job's friends and said, you guys are off base. And what you need to do is you need to come up with an offering. But you don't offer it. If you offer it, I'm not going to accept it. You go over to Job and have him offer it for you. And they did that. Then God restored Job's fortunes. Now, he restored his fortunes. He couldn't restore his children, but he had more kids. And he ended up having the same number. And at the very end, it says, Job died an old man full of days. So here, what are we to think about all this stuff? And I have a few things. I've already said this, and I think it needs to be pounded in our heads. It's wrong to assume that bad things only happen to bad people. Now, there are people, I'm sure, that make stupid decisions and bad things happen to them, and that's, of course, that happens. I'm not saying but it's just wrong to assume that. And I've said, and I'm saying it again, Job asked God the question, why? He didn't answer. No different than us. Every now and then, God will give us an answer. But I'm picturing what it would have been like hanging around Jesus, and those guys must have been scratching their head all the time because they'd ask him one thing, and he'd go talking about something else, and they're kind of going, what's going on here? So Job was called blameless and upright, turning away from evil, yet he was not sinless. Just as I mentioned in the verse, he still looked forward to the need of needing a redeemer. So then I thought, well, how does this apply to our lives? And I wrote down this question, I just thought, okay, let me come up with some examples, personal examples. It was amazing. In like 2 minutes, I came up with 3 examples. And this is just, this is just 3. I stopped at 3. So I had a cousin. His name was Todd. He's 59 years old, and he had cancer and died. Kind of like that. My younger cousin. So I know a guy at work. Just this week he talked to me. Works in my group. His marriage has fallen apart. And, he was telling me about it because I'm his boss. But I think he was telling me about it. I don't know. He was telling me about it. And regardless of who did what, and who was wrong, or how many both of them were wrong, or whatever, he had this marriage and he had this dream of the future, and it just fell apart. The third one, got a buddy at work. His wife's name is Lori. She had a lump back here. Found it, and so they went to the doctor. Hey, what's going on with this lump? It was a PCOMA, kind of cancer. Interesting that I had a sarcoma right here. And they went to the same doctor to get it treated. Got it treated, went through, surgery to cut it out, did the scans. I just remember going home to Lori. Those scans, man, those sucked. And they came out good, it was good. Well, third scan, and they found another chunk up here. And then they did another scan of the whole body, and they found some cancer somewhere else. So what are we to do when there's not a clear answer? Well, I think the first thing you need to do is over and over and over, you need to study the character of God. And just in the book of Job, you can find so much. He's the ultimate power of creation. He is the creator. God is greater than man. He knows all things, and he sees all things that men do. He rules all of creation. Not only did he make it, but he rules how it works. He shows his goodness by providing, here at the end, he showed his goodness by providing for Job's friends, for them to have a sacrifice to help get them straight. Those are just part of what I pulled out here. But I think by you having personal conviction and understanding of the character of God, then you can deal with this question of why you don't get answers a little bit better. And then you put all that together, and, here's some more math. In math, there's a thing called infinity. Infinity is basically something that goes on forever, and you can't, if you had a bucket, this is this crazy analogy because you can't do analogies with infinity, but if I had a bucket full of an infinite number of balls and I put one in, there'd still be an infinite number of balls. If I took one out, there'd still be an infinite number of balls. Okay? That's God. If you learn something about God, if he teaches you something, you've got just the smallest thing. There's so much. And I think what you have to do is you have to conclude that the vast unknowableness of God, coupled with his goodness, leaves us with the ability to say, if he doesn't give me an answer, I'm good with that. Obviously, I don't need an answer, but I've got God. That's all I need. So I'll close in prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for teaching us your word. Thank you for reminding us things. Help everyone in this room to take away something that they needed to be just a little bit more of a disciple. Lord, if there's someone in here that doesn't know you, help them to have the courage to say, well, how can I know God? How can I be straight with him? I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.